Hi, this is Randy and welcome back to Furniture Shuffle. I've done a few videos now, so I thought I would just take a second and formally introduce myself. I am from the Midwest originally, born and raised in Michigan, spent about 25 years in Minnesota, loved Minnesota, had some great times, made some great friends, but for the last 2.5 years, I have called the great state of Arizona my home. So when we moved to Arizona, we didn't bring a lot of furniture with us. And so in my search for furniture at furniture stores, I thought, well, I'll just stop at some thrift stores as well. And I quickly realized that I could find some really cool pieces that just might need a little updating, a little refinishing, maybe some minor repairs, and certainly the prices were better. So once I got done with some amazing pieces for our house, I decided to keep going. I do have a background in photography, so I've always had kind of that creative side, and so I decided to start selling on Facebook Marketplace. And that kind of brings me to where I am today. I like to take furniture, update it, modernize it, give it a new life, and keep it out of the landfills. And hopefully along the way, inspire you guys to do the same. So thanks for watching, and let's get started on the next project. I was pretty excited to find this little 3-drawer dresser at the thrift store, and the reason being is that usually you find them and there's big gouges in them, something's wrong with them, the drawers are broken, but this one was actually in really good shape. The only thing is it was missing one of the handles there, so I will replace all of those and I will repurpose those two on a future project. The other really nice thing about this dresser is that it is solid wood, so I don't have to worry about burning through any veneer, which is going to make my job scraping and sanding a heck of a lot easier. A lot of times when I start a piece, I'm really not sure how the final product is going to look. So as I'm removing the hardware, the drawers, cleaning, I start to get ideas getting really close to the piece and seeing its bones. And ideas start to form. And because this piece was solid wood, I did not want to paint it. So I decided that I was going to stain it, and I thought I could do a really cool design with just stain. One of the drawers had some contact paper, and luckily for me, it actually just peeled right off. A lot of times it's really difficult to get old contact paper off. Sometimes you have to use a heat gun or even a razor blade to get it off. But like I said, this just peeled right off for me, and I was so thankful. I'm using my carbide scraper to scrape off all the old varnish and some of the finish here, and I find this process very therapeutic because for me, it creates the biggest change, other than painting. While I was scraping, I did find a little damage to one of the front boards. One of these pieces was cracked and pulling up on the edge. So I just took a syringe, filled it with wood glue, and just went in there and filled up that whole crack with the wood glue, trying to get it some good coverage. After I've got it all glued up, I'm going to remove the excess here, and then I will be taking a little board that I just have extra, and I'm going to lay it on top of there and clamp that down just so it holds that whole piece nice and even while it dries. While that glue dries, I am going to go ahead and just scrape the drawers. The varnish came off pretty easy, but there still is a little bit of a finish on there that we will take care of in the sanding. this little guy came out wondering what all the noise was all about. So, sorry little guy, you can get back to your push-ups. These little crevices here, I am just sanding by hand because I can do a better job than I can with my orbital sander. So when sanding, the grit number on the sandpaper corresponds to how rough the grit is. The lower the grit, the more coarse it is. Higher the number, the finer the grit is. So I started out with 80, went to 120, and then 220. So you want to gradually step up. You don't want to go more than 2 times the number of the grit. So for instance, I started out with 80. I wouldn't want to jump up to the 220. That's why I went to the 120. Because if you do that, what's going to happen is that coarser grit jumping up to a much finer grit, you may not be able to get out the scratches that were created by that coarser grit sandpaper. That's why you want to gradually bump your sandpaper up. After this final sanding, I'm going to wipe everything down with a wet rag just to get any of that extra sawdust off. And after this all dries, sometimes it raises the grain a little bit. So I'm just going to go back with a piece of 220 grit sandpaper and just lightly wipe it across the whole piece just to knock that grain back down so it's smooth again. And then I'll just wipe that with a microfiber cloth. I wanted to do kind of a cool geometric design on this piece, so I'm just going ahead and taping off the areas that I do not want to stain. I'm doing some angles on this piece, so I'm just taking a razor blade here and lightly cutting through the tape where I want the angle to be. Careful not to cut into the wood. I needed to put the drawers back in to get the angles right on the piece, and without the hardware, I needed to get those drawers back out. So I used this handy dandy little crochet or knitting needle. I actually found it in a previous piece, and it works perfectly to slip in those holes and get those drawers back out. Because I'm not going to be staining the whole piece, I put little pieces of tape to remind myself the sections that I am going to be staining, just so I don't make a mistake. I'm going to go ahead and stain the sections with a little piece of tape with this Varathane English Chestnut color. The other portions I am going to leave bare wood. So even with taping, the water-based stain that I used bled into the grain a little bit. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is take a little piece of sandpaper, make a point with it, and then go along that edge and clean that up. And this is what it looks like after cleaning those edges up. I'm finishing the piece with this bare water-based urethane in a satin finish. I have thinned it with a little bit of water just because in Arizona, if I don't do that, it'll just dry way too quickly for me. So most products recommend not using them if it's over 90 degrees, but in the summer and fall here in Arizona, it doesn't get below 90 very much, and unfortunately, my garage is not air conditioned. So I will be doing 3 coats of the poly on here with sanding with a 220 grit sandpaper in between each coat, just lightly sanding. After the final coat, I am just going to take a brown paper bag and lightly wipe that across the surface to get rid of any dust that might have landed on there. This will take care of that without scratching the surface. I'm also going to be using some Howard Feed-N Wax on the drawers just to freshen them up a bit. And finally, installing the hardware. This was by far my easiest flip this year, and it turned out great. If you've enjoyed this project, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.